How do you look at the right, real question behind that transformation? How do you look at the problem statement to help your client?
The psychology of change is a very interesting thing because at its heart, it's very human. Irrespective of whether you introduce digital, AI, technology in any form.
Welcome to Tech Bites with Ash, where we discuss trends in digital technology that support true business outcomes. I'm Ashu Bhatia, a consultant, an author, and a practitioner of all practical insights on your technology investments. Welcome back to my channel, Tech Bites with Ash. Today, I'm really privileged to talk to Mark Elia, who's the Global Director of Business Consulting at DSS Plus. He's got a great experience in really large-scale transformations, both on business and technology. He was leading a lot of that kind of work with Accenture for many years, and before that with KPMG. I think some of his perspectives where he talks of his value versus rhythm versus risks is going to be phenomenal for the audience. So please welcome Mark Elia. Morning, Mark. Thanks so much for taking the time. So excited to see you on my podcast here. Thank you for taking the time.
I appreciate being invited, Ash.
Before I start, Mark, I always like the audience to get to know the real person, the real leader behind, Mark Elia, who's been doing so much digital transformation. Talk to the audience a little bit about your journey. Where did you grow up? How did that really shape your aspirations for you to take such a vital leadership role today?
Now, Ash, I can't say that I specifically set out on a journey that would lead to a career focused on transformation and innovation. As I look back, I rather think the journey has shaped me rather than the other way around. I see that humans are a product of the influences that we absorb over time. And in my case, I would categorize them in two areas. Technical interest, I'm very, very keen on learning, and a very human need to have fun. There's a little boy in all of us, and that hasn't changed with me. When I started my career, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I just followed my father's footsteps. He was a civil engineer, and I was always very clear that I wanted to build something. This was in my DNA. I wasn't sure what that was going to be in the beginning. The journey started with designing and building man-made structures like bridges and things like that. But that envelope was rather constrained, bound by standards, engineering standards, in this case, structural and civil standards. So the journey graduated to solving technical natural problems when I spent a number of years working in the petroleum industry. This is the human understanding of nature, reservoirs in this case. And this was a very exciting time because it didn't just present challenging work, but also diverse work locations. But to be honest, in the end, that ran its course as well. Going back, I guess, my history is I was born in London. I grew up in Dubai and Cyprus before returning to the UK for my education. I was very young. These experiences when I was an expat traveling the world, they really shaped me. And I think I am very much predisposed to change, even though, of course, I didn't realize it at the time. The need to set up and experience new personal settings was very important to me, as well as the technical nature of the work. So I did an MBA, I believe that was in 2002 in London. It was obvious that consulting was the right fit for me. There was no other vocation. There is no other vocation that presents the opportunities for working on very different type of challenges, different problems, exciting new contexts. And since we're living in a world that is perpetually changing, the transformational requirements of governments, societies, and industries to adapt to evolving norms will never be the same. I really am drawn to this. I still am in my 50s. But now I joined a company called DSS Plus a couple of years ago as a director, global. And I focus very much on the challenges we've just discussed, including protecting people and assets against an increasing array of risks, building high-impact organizations supported by digital. Nothing can be done without that support these days.
Yep.
And really focused on continual value, so developing and creating sustainable value. And one of the things that I admire about this company is that it has a very clear purpose of protection, not just of people and assets, but the environment. So the whole package seemed to lend itself to what I was interested in.
Excellent. Great journey, Mark. And since you mentioned digital, right? So let's jump right in. I know that part of our main work right now these days surrounded by so much technology, so much transformation, so much change, as you alluded to. It all started with what? ERP, BPR, then it was cloud, data-led transformation. These days, a lot of people talk about AI-first transformation. So that word transformation is such, for lack of better words, a buzzword. Help us understand, how do you look at the right, real question behind that transformation?
The psychology of change is a very interesting thing because at its heart, it's very human. Irrespective of whether you introduce digital, AI, technology in any form, it is still innately human to be able to move from a point where you are today to a new vantage point tomorrow. So the question or problem statement will often originate for transformation to solicit a response to some unfulfilled ambition or some unresolved problem or risk within the organization, within governments. It is often asked because something is driving some form of action that is not part of the norm today. If the point of the question was already part of the business and executed well within that context, we wouldn't even be discussing it. So there is a need for change, for something to transform. So in my experience, these questions are often asked because an individual is experiencing some external influence or noise that's threatening to compromise the sanctity of their influence or responsibility. That could be at CEO level, CFO level, it could be frontline supervisors, it could be any of the above. So you spoke earlier of digital strategy. But let's consider, for instance, a CDO who might well ask a very different question to fulfill their obligations to uplift digital capability in an organization. To a CFO who might be potentially looking at balancing investment or a return. To a frontline worker who will have no notion of either and may seek meaningful digital interaction that makes him or her safer and more effective. So the vantage point of each is different. So in all of these cases, no one is wrong because they're simply offering different perspectives of the same digital output that is expected under the sponsorship of the CEO, if that was the board agenda. So if viewed holistically, the expectations of all of these stakeholders, if they're all fully aligned, then everyone would be aligned to the impact of self, the impact to self. If the question, however, originates from any of the proponents without the wider context, then the question, why are we doing this, is already compromised. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. I mean, if I only had the brightest or the noisiest part of the puzzle, I might be able to clearly focus and see that the object of the puzzle was an umbrella, but I might miss the context of the background, which will tell me whether it's a sunny or a rainy day. So this kind of illustrates human nature. Human nature is, we require the big picture, but we also need to be specific. So as you point out in your introduction, once you've settled on the why we're doing it, then the frame has already been established, and we need to color in the details of the scope, the time, the resourcing, and other details. Additionally, for any design of any transformation to be effective, we need to recognize that the execution will be delivered by a human being, and that human being perhaps does not have access to the holistic logic, but is going to be driven by a personal agenda. And therefore, effective transformation can only be driven by a cascade of the right questions and answers, being asked by the right people, under the right circumstances, under the right time, such as the sum of those inputs make up the design of the initiatives, which will ultimately transform.
Yeah. No, that's so deep, Mark. I think the key there, as you mentioned, is there's so many different stakeholders, and you said each transformation is innately human, as you said it, right? Human beings, we are all, as you mentioned, right? If there's a why, that kind of helps alignment, but that's a billion-dollar question to have everyone kind of row the boat in the same direction. The why behind a transformation or a change shouldn't just be just a bullet point on a slide. It's the emotional engine of leadership, right? And when you have so many different stakeholders, as you gave an example, the CDO, the CFO, the operational people, and the people in the digital plant who have no clue as to where we're trying to go towards, that typically leads to a lot of multiple imperfect answers sometimes, right? So there's a lot of compressed time frames, there's noisy environments. As you said, everyone has got a personal agenda, and you have to align all that into one direction. How do you, from your vantage point, working with so many leaders, how do you kind of make sure that the answers that you're getting, you're kind of sifting and prioritizing to know that they fit the culture, that they fill the appetite, and it's the right time, as you put it?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing, I guess, is to acknowledge that there are no imperfect answers, and there are no perfect answers. Every answer is going to be useful in providing an understanding of where the responder is coming from, what they're experiencing at that moment in time. In other words, their context, their vantage point. So in this answer, let's perhaps consider another example where the problem statement is focused on the reduction of operating costs as a context. So in this case, rather than a CDO, let's focus on a CFO who has decided to improve operating margins and has solicited the support of operations leadership in a cost rationalization exercise across core business. The objective is clearly stated, right? I've got a tangible metric that can be measured at the end of a preset timeline for any initiative versus a baseline that's we can set today. And the difference between those, hopefully net positive, is going to signify the success of that program. So it seems for now that this question is very, very clear on why we should undertake this program. But we need to move to the next set of questions that will help us define the tasks we need to undertake and by when in order to complete this objective. We should again recognize that regardless of the context, human beings will be both affected and executors of this plan. You will have a project team that's doing the work, and then you will have a community that's going to be affected by the results of this work. And it's inevitable that those parties will be able to contribute more or less to the overall target. Some may be more willing, others less so. And indeed, some may even want to support, but are constrained by what they can do in their organization. They could be constrained by regulation, law, or other externalities. So quantifying and ranking the impact that any one group can have is only half the equation. The other being, as you say, the motivation, ability, and the appetite to play along. So the very human element. And to complicate this alignment, it's necessary for effective transformation that any one party should be completely forthright with their reservations and intent and make sure those things are spelt out so that we can build those into our approach. So there's a lot involved in designing effective transformation, but in my view, this does not just start with a question which establishes the why, but sets out basic principles that can be applied uniformly across everyone. So keep it simple, in other words.
Yeah.
These essentially principles of play set out the rules for the whole team without bias. It's like a game of football. Everyone knows the rule. If you move outside the lines, you are charged with a foul, right? So once you set out these rules of play, regardless of status, regardless of motivation, regardless of appetite, then everyone is playing by the same rules. So you've kind of addressed that human part, which is there's the North Star, that's what we're heading to. But then you need to move in the applicability of that particular program for your organization, hence the technical criteria for quantification. And then you go through the exercise of prioritizing what can be delivered within a certain time frame. But there's a certain logic that needs to be applied whilst contextualizing continuously with human behavior, the psychology of change, essentially, that you spoke about.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's great, because I think there's a lot to unpack there that you gave us. As you said, that bringing everyone together, then kind of getting to the next level of questions and tasks and some timelines to make sure that you're actually navigating to the North Star. And your analogy on the football, right? Like, you know the rules, you got to play. If you don't play, you get the foul. But it reminds me of a funny thing one of my clients ever told me was that transformation is kind of like going to the gym, right? Everyone wants the results, but you don't want to sweat the reps, right? So it's kind of like you need to know how to break that down, align all the stakeholders. If the answer kind of feels wrong, how do you kind of look for the signals to say that this does not feel right and you got to go a little more deeper and kind of recalibrate and co-create something that might be a better option?
Well, yes. I mean, very rarely will transformations go through, especially an initial phase of success, because you are getting this alignment in place. And you have an organization that's comprised of many, many different facets, and everyone has a different vantage point. So the structure that we spoke about is correct, but the structure and the motivation and the what, the when, the why, and all of this stuff isn't necessarily going to give you the results that you want. And it's entirely possible that the answer you've come up with is not fitting within the natural rhythm of the organization. So let's take that same example we discussed a moment ago on cost rationalization. So the problem statement was an articulated objective to reduce cost by a certain percentage within a certain period. Whether this is done through digital, whether it's done through process reengineering, whether it's done through synergy projects, whatever it may be. So in this case, the initiative was raised, if I remember, by our CFO. And of course, the CFO has an objective of increasing the returns from core business. And assume that the program of work is set up to address a combination of fixed and variable costs across third parties and internal operations. And everyone's on board and everyone's ready to go. So The transformation, which is a response to the first question, as you asked, does not feel right. And why can that be if everything's set up in the way that we had assumed, right? That we had planned for? Well, it's probably because it lacks some context, important context, some externality that has not featured, some behavior that has not been considered. Of course, there are variations, but business transformations are usually instigated to address growth, performance, risk, or any weighted combination of the three. So if the cost rationalization answer set out in question 2 that we talked about doesn't feel right, it's because it's probably blind to other opportunities. In other words, you're perhaps over-investing in performance and you're not focused on growth enough, because at the vantage point of the CEO, they're perhaps interested in the growth of the organization. But I'm so focused on cost rationalization that I'm cutting off my legs to my ability to grow, because I'm cutting in a sense that I'm not seeing the big picture. So this is not also the other dimension we spoke about. So we spoke about value operations, growth and risk. What if it's not accounting for risks? So our focus is very much on increasing performance in the current state. But I've got disrupted supply chains, legacy assets, aging workforce, and any number of other factors that are pulling my throughput or my production down. What if I don't build resilience into my organization? Then I'm running, simply trying to catch up. So I'm not increasing my performance. I'm just mitigating the downside of not building that resilience in. So in short, there's no qualification in the first question of what is bad cost. There's no determination of what is waste versus good cost that can build that resilience into the organization and even help it grow. So if you're going to direct significant investment into a decision or initiative to cut costs without considering whether there is potential for good costs to effectively be deployed into a reconfigured operating model to explore synergies at portfolio level, then you're kind of missing the opportunity to do more with less, which is the whole point of this. So this example that we've given shows the recalibration of the response using the validity of the original question. But now we have to recalibrate for what is good versus what is bad, and what metrics do we need for our cost reduction exercise, such that metrics such as cost to produce, cost to sell, unit contribution can promote that direct ownership from key stakeholders. In other words, I consider the growth agenda and the performance agenda at the same time. And by the way, the biggest part of all of this that we see nowadays is sustainability. Sustainability is often seen as, well, I wouldn't call it a bad cost, but it almost turns into a compliance issue rather than a value issue. And it's the same with digital. It's almost like everyone's doing digital, and therefore we must do digital. The fundamental question is, are your initiatives and your investment in digital aligned to what you're looking to achieve as a business, not just at an asset level?
That's so true. That's so true. I think a lot of people are doing that because it's just brass tacks. If all my competition and the environment is doing it, it just makes it means that I need to do it even to sustain what I have today. And then the whole growth curve that you mentioned, right? You put it beautifully. You said there's always value versus risk versus growth, and you're trying to do the trade-offs as you navigate your enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, if you come back to the example of football, I mean, I'm an avid football fan. The rules of the game are clear. The envelope of the game is played on a pitch, which is of some standard or maybe variable size, but we all know what the outliers are. We all know where the boundaries are. But that doesn't mean that the team is going to be effective just because I understand what the rules of the game are. And in fact, the rules of the game are not the only component. If I then talk about, well, I'll go out and buy all of the best players, have all of the capability to bring into this team, that doesn't mean that you're going to win a championship. You win a championship by making sure that the sum of the parts of that team is greater than the whole. And that is where success lies. So everyone is propping everyone else up. They have a singular objective. And the collaboration that happens between different capabilities, which is focused on one output, which is scoring the goal, one more goal than the opponent, is uniformly understood and applied by everyone. That is a better team than a team full of superstars.
Let me ask you this. After all of this work that you're doing, you're kind of doing the trade-offs, you're getting all the stakeholders aligned. What if you realize that somewhere along the line, when I started somewhere, the question was somewhat wrong? It takes immense courage, I would assume, to say, you know what? I got to step back. True transformation really means that I got to look at my why again, and I'm going to change the question. How do you do that?
I'm a big fan of this question. Because sometimes after many iterations of response, you still don't move at pace. And it cannot be that we continue to focus on efficiency and forget about effectiveness. I mean, doing something efficiently and doing it faster and doing it cheaper does not necessarily get me a better output. So I think the distinction between these two key words comes to mind continuously. Sometimes, no matter how many times a response is solicited from stakeholders, how many times it's adjusted to be designed into a transformation or a change program, you're right, it still doesn't feel like progress is being made. I haven't come across this too often because a lot of effort goes into setting that North Star. But when you do see that, I don't know about you, but I have an aha moment. Okay, this is something different. And it's more likely to happen because either party in the transformation or some key stakeholder have either not been clear or forthcoming with their reasons in the very beginning, or a standard program question was posed by other stakeholders and the audience only responded in the way that they know how, instead of broadening their perspective. Maybe I'll give you an example. This is one of my favorite anecdotes, actually. So this is an example from an end-to-end digital transformation program that had both enterprise and geographic coverage. End-to-end digital, huge organization, multi-billion-dollar organization working across many business units. So project work streams were responsible for digital and others were responsible for operations. And everyone had kind of cleanly defined objectives and program incentives to kind of engender pace and progress of this unified project, this unified team exercise. Now, there was another work stream that was responsible for enterprise governance. So this is a team that establishes policies and rules and processes that will control and guide the enterprise sustainably going forward. So whatever's learnt during the digital transformation is going to be passed into this governance forum in order to be controlled and continuously improved in time, over time. So the progress of these teams matched the project management pace setters. So in other words, where value was being created. And others promoted success stories and innovation in their work stream and were recognized for it. But the governance team does not have a direct link to those tangible values. Right? That tangible, because they're simply pulling processes together and making sure everyone's aligned. They're not the ones that are re-articulating a synergy program, or they're not articulating a contract renegotiation that's directly leading to savings, as an example. So the question is how should a team be recognized in a project or an enterprise when other teams are being recognized for quantifiable and demonstrable progress linked to value, whereas these are not? And in this particular project, this work stream, like I said, was linked to controls, and yes, they had a view of the sustainable control of value going forward, but they were not directly linked to it. So when recognition comes, a very human thing, the psychology of change. So certain teams are being recognized and are being rewarded and are being celebrated, and then you've got these others that are not, and their work is the glue. It's not being recognized, but it's the glue that's going to create this sustainable and continuous improvement exercise. So you have morale issues. Although everything around them is correct, you have morale issues, despite the why, the what, the when, everything being set out. There are morale issues, and there is a kind of a lack of ownership of output. If you re-ask the question, what is important to you, not to the project, relative to the project, what's important to you? You rephrase that question, and then you establish a link between what the teams are achieving. In other words, one team cannot complete their definition of value succeeded until this team is equally rewarded. All things now being equal, all teams being fairly recognized, you see morale and ownership change completely. You have redefined the question of the value contribution of this team. And it was a simple gesture that addresses a very human trait, which is, I don't want to be left behind when everyone else in the team is performing.
Exactly. No, I think that's exactly the point that you made in the beginning, that every transformation is so innately human, as you put it, that you have to, as you put this example, right, governance, the real glue, a lot of connective tissue, but if you don't have the right KPIs and OKRs to get them going, there's going to be a lot of misalignment, right? And you don't want that. You don't want that. As I say, right? The biggest thing that we learn in professional services is that, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but then someone added that then they politely refuse to attend the afternoon town hall, right? Because they want to eat. So it's kind of like you need to kind of look at all the stakeholders, as you said, and then kind of design your program so that effectively you're measuring success and kind of going on that journey. So, no, this is great, Mark. I know we could keep going on. This is so much to unpack here, to be honest with you. I think we'll have to do a couple of sequels to unpack a few more areas, because what I would love to get on with you also is that apart from deciding the direction, how do you kind of make sure execution begins to happen? But I think in closing thoughts, I would love to understand, where can the audience connect with you, Mark? Because I'm sure as they hear some of these nuggets, they want to reach out to you. So anything that I can share?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. And response to your last statement there, I'll offer two simple words, which are always in the back of my mind, which is risk and rhythm. Risk and rhythm. The risk to self, the risk to organization, the risk to whatever it is you're looking to address, as forming the foundation of what you want to achieve, and then establishing an operating rhythm that can deliver that with all of the things that we've considered in this podcast, so that everyone is rowing to the same beat. If you can get that, then transformation has a much greater chance of success, whether it's digital, whether it's sustainability, or anything in between.
Excellent. I'll share your LinkedIn handle with the audience, but this risk and rhythm, that's a great tagline. I think that kind of culminates all of that thing that you mentioned. So we'll have to definitely bring you back onto this podcast and get more into the rhythms of how do we execute. So thank you so much for your time today, Mark. Really appreciate it.